Coming up in this episode, I do sex to a motorcycle. Hello and welcome to the shop and another episode of Shit Gets Fixed. Today, we're gonna fix some shit on this. This is a 1971 Honda CB100 in the color of candy gold. With its claimed 11 horsepower, and that's a very wishful claim, it's definitely not the fastest thing ever, but it's a Honda, so basically it'll run forever. And let's not forget about its plush ride, provided by its END suspension. I know what you're asking yourself. What the hell is END suspension? It means essentially non-dampened. Alrighty, before we get knee deep into the 71 Honda, I'd like to remind you to please like and subscribe. And if you can stand the exhausting amount of tomfoolery, please watch the entirety of this video. It makes all the difference to the success of this channel, and more importantly, this guy's overly sensitive ego. All right, enough with that. Let's get right to the Honda. All right, so the Honda's in for mostly just some basic tune-up stuff. We're gonna do an oil change the spark plug, check and adjust the ignition timing, make sure that's all proper, lube the pivot points and stuff like that. The big problem is the fuel in the fuel tank has oxidized, and it is green and it stinks bad. And there is a little bit of rust in the tank, so it's probably been sitting in there a minute. So we need to drain that and then address the rust that's in the fuel tank. I'll show you a little bit of that later. So with that, we also have to do a carb rebuild. You turn the petcock on right now and it just dumps out the overflow. So, and that's due to not only the rust in the fuel tank, but probably the float is stuck or something like that. So I'm gonna kind of strip this thing down and we'll take a closer look inside the fuel tank. I'll get the carburetor off of here and I'll get that disassembled. We'll take a closer look at that. So let's get to it. Before digging in too far, I'd like to gather as much relevant information I have from my overhead library. I should mention that my shop is very small, and it's the only place I have to properly store the hundreds of service manuals I have collected over the years. And it just so happens that I have 2 books that contain technical specs and general service information for the CB100. Perfect. Radio. So I've drained the oil on the CB100. The drain plug is just about center on the bottom of the crankcase, obviously. That's a 17 millimeter drive. And the CB100s have a oil filter screen, which can be removed. It's basically for large pieces of swarf. That's about all it's good for. But you remove this cover, which is located on the left side of the crankcase, lower part of the crankcase, I should say. That is a 23 millimeter drive for the cover. Here are the components. Here we've got the screen, spring, and cover. And then, of course, we've seen this many times. The crush washer on the drain plug has been used and abused so many times that it is mushroomed over and has become one with the drain plug. So we're going to get that replaced with the new copper crush washer. So let's keep going here. All right, let's do it. So I have the ignition timing set at idle. So I have the point opening at the F mark on the rotor, and I'm doing this statically with an ohm meter. And what I'm going to do now is check full advance statically the same way. I've made these, over the years, I've made these special shouldered washers that I can put over the advanced timing unit and lock the unit in full advance. And then I can statically with an ohm meter test that the timing, the advanced timing, is happening within the specified marks on the rotor. The only reason why I do that, if you check the advanced timing dynamically with a timing light, when you rev the bikes up, some of these Hondas like this one, when you rev them up, oil tends to go everywhere and it makes a huge mess. So in this case, I just do it this way statically. It just seems to make more sense to me. So I'm going to finish checking the ignition timing. So let's do this. So just finishing up the valve adjustment here. The spec for the CB100 is 2 thou worth of lash or clearance on the intake and the exhaust. I am using part of my Motion Pro screw type tappet adjustment kit. This is a game changer if you do this kind of work. They come with several different sizes for the lock nut, and then also several different drive sizes for the actual tappet itself. This one being the 3mm square. In combination, they work fantastic to get the adjustment just right. So what I've done, and this is my approach, I've set this to be a snug 2 thou since that's the clearance. So just a slight bit of drag when I remove that from the tappet and valve, the clearance there. And then what I'll do is I'll take a 3 thou, in this case feeler gauge, and see if I can get it in there, and I cannot. So it's kind of a go, no-go situation. So in this case, that does confirm that I indeed am at, the adjustment is at, 2 thou or a snug 2 thou, but definitely not a 3 because I can't get a 3 in there. That's how I do it. Lots of different ways to skin a cat here, but anyway, that should do it for the valve adjustment. So let's keep going here. You know what? I think right now is a perfect time for a explainer.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I thought I would take just a couple minutes to do an explainer for people not familiar with a screw type tappet valve adjustment. I made this incredibly accurate cardboard cutout of a cross-sectional view of a 4-stroke internal combustion engine. I know, pretty neat, hey? Anyway, because sometimes words are hard and a picture, or in this case a representative model, is worth 1,000 of those hard words, let's get right to it. So when we talk about adjusting the valve clearance or lash on a screw type tappet adjustment engine, we're talking about the clearance between the tappet business end here and the stem of the valve located here. This is where we use our feeler gauge and our special tools to adjust the tappet to get our proper amount of valve lash. This clearance or lash needs to be adjusted at regular intervals because of wear that occurs on all the valve train components, like the cam, rocker arms, valve seats, and so on. When the piston comes up on its compression stroke and the explosion occurs, two things are happening. First, the rapid expansion and outward forces are created by the fuel-air mixture igniting. Secondly, during this explosion, heat is also generated. If we don't have enough valve clearance and the valve is held slightly open, instead of all of those explosive forces pushing our piston down during its power stroke, some of those forces escape past the valve face and valve seat, decreasing our engine's performance. Our valve also loses or transfers a large amount of its heat through the contact area of those same surfaces. This is important so we don't burn a valve, which as mechanics speak for, it's basically full. On the other extreme, if we have excessive or too much clearance, the tappet can attack the valve stem too harshly, like a hammer hitting the head of a nail, causing excessive wear and havoc throughout the entire valve train system. Well, I'm super excited I took the time and finally got my valve adjustment done. Oh no! Now I have a head gasket leak! I tell you, if it's not one thing, it's another. I am just sick and tired of this tinkering. First it's this, then it's that. I would give my left leg for a trouble-free, high-performance internal combustion engine. You would think in this day and age that wouldn't be so hard, but no! It's just my luck this would happen again. I just can't believe this.
Ladies and gentlemen.
All right, so I've got the carburetor disassembled for the CB100. You can clearly see that the gasoline that was in here did oxidize and probably evaporate a little bit. You can see the demarcation line there of where the gas was sitting in the flow chamber. So this was most likely ethanol fuel or 10% ethanol. Here where I live in this county, that is what you get. You cannot get straight 100% gasoline. So I'm assuming that this is gasoline with 10% ethanol. So that's clearly dirty. Another interesting thing, what I did notice is that the float gets hung up and and basically will not pass by the float bowl gasket here. And it basically will get stuck on there. So that's why when we turn the fuel valve on the fuel tank, it would simply overflow and come out the overflow. And here's the reason why. So if you look very closely at these two towers that hold the float pivot pin to the carburetor itself, you can see that this pin or this tower on the casting of the carburetor is bent, and it is facing down slightly and lower than this one. If I take my stare-at rule, you can kind of see it a little bit better. And it's clear that it is bent. So the whole entire float body is kind of facing this direction. So I think my approach is going to be to simply bend the floats themselves on the beam here, try and bend it in a way that it will work properly inside the float chamber, because if you try bending one of these towers or tabs on the carburetor body, it's going to make for a bad day. It's simply going to break off. The metal that, the aluminum that these carburetors are made out of is just so brittle. So anyway, that's the approach I'm going to take, I think. I'm going to spend a few minutes and think about it, but right now I'm going to disassemble the rest of the carburetor. We'll take a look at the jets in here. Let's go for it. So I've disassembled the carburetor, and this carburetor is stamped right here. It's very hard to see, but it is stamped SL10A. That information alongside my service manual tells me that we should have a 110 main jet, and we do. The slow jet or pilot jet should be a 38, and it is. And the needle clip position should be third groove from the top, which it is. And then last but not least, the initial pilot air screw setting for this carburetor should be 1.5 to 1 5/8 turns out. So looks like everything is proper here. What I'm going to do is get this into my ultrasonic cleaner and get this thing cleaned up. Let's go for it. So the carburetor has gone through the ultrasonic cleaner, and it has done its job quite well. Ultrasonic cleaners are perfect for cleaning carburetors. I was able to kind of solve the problem here. If you remember, this tower on the casting of the carburetor was bent down, causing the whole float to be askew. I kind of went with a two-prong approach here. Against my better judgment, I did bend this tower up slightly, about half the distance that I needed, and then I did manipulate the floats on the beam just enough where it will pass the new float bowl gasket and should float properly in the float chamber. So that's as far as I want to go with that. All the jets are installed, and I did set the air screw at the initial setting of 1 1/2 turns out from fully seated. So once we get this in the bike, we'll go ahead and tune it and see how it goes. As promised, let's take a look inside of the fuel tank. You can see the level of surface rust that is present and consistent throughout the inner surface of the tank. For this level of surface corrosion, I like to use Evapo-Rust, a water-soluble, non-flammable liquid rust remover. I should mention that I am not sponsored by CRC, the manufacturer of Evapo-Rust, but the results speak for themselves. After allowing the Evapo-Rust to sit overnight, all the rust is gone. After several hot water rinse cycles and a fogging with WD-40 to prevent flash rusting during the air drying process, we should be good to go. After only some minor adjustments to the carburetor, the 71 Honda CB100 ticks over fabulously. I'll be the first to admit, as far as performance, it does nothing really well, but it doesn't do anything really poorly either. Case in point, its doingy suspension, it actually kind of works. And like most of the bikes that I've worked on, the little CB100 grew on me. I kind of like it. I mean, not as much as a fat kid likes cake, but nevertheless, I still like it. Thanks, CB100.